My name is Michael Murray.
And I'm Mary O'Reilly.
And we've come here today to have a chat about some of the issues related to vaccination. Got my first question. I'm not comfortable being in the first group to have a vaccine. Can I wait and put my name down for a future round? The answer is we don't quite know when the next round will happen. At the moment we're rolling out vaccines and we're not sure at what point in time we'll be able to circle back and to give the second dose or to catch up for people who missed out or elected not to have the vaccine on the first occasion. People would be aware that currently none of the vaccines are mandatory in Victoria.
So I think it's important to take the opportunity. This vaccine is really here to look after you and your loved ones and to really try and protect the community from COVID. So I think it's a good opportunity to just take it when it's offered and hopefully that'll keep us all safe. Okay, so I've got the next question. If it's so safe, why is the COVID vaccine not mandatory or not compulsory for the aged care workers caring for my loved one? Now, the reason for this is at the moment in Victoria, none of our vaccines are actually mandated, including in hospitals and aged care. So this is not something we've traditionally done. We've relied on our healthcare workers and our aged care workers to have the vaccines to protect themselves and the people that they're caring for. It may be in the future that this may change, but certainly not at the moment. And we're just asking everyone to have the vaccine, but you know, it may be in several months' time when we have enough vaccine and we have everyone vaccinated that wants to be vaccinated, then the situation may change.
Aged care in many ways have borne the brunt of COVID outbreaks, certainly in Victoria. And I think all of us who work in aged care are very much aware of the effects on our staff, on our colleagues, on our families, and particularly on the residents, where there's been a significant number of deaths. That was a very difficult time for all of us, and it wasn't so long ago. So in truth, I think it's unlikely, at least in the short term, we're going to need to have coercion to vaccinate, because I think people are going to be very keen, having seen that this vaccine is so incredibly safe, and having now seen data from overseas to show that it's terribly effective, and there's almost no side effects being recorded, people are going to be keen to protect themselves, their loved ones, and their work colleagues and residents. So I think there's going to be an excellent uptake, and already we're seeing uptake of up to 90–95%, which is fantastic. Our next question is, one of the vaccines needs 2 doses 12 weeks apart. What happens if I don't get the second dose? As we're all aware, both of the vaccines, in fact all of the vaccines that are currently licensed in Australia are 2 doses. And they vary between being 3 weeks apart or 12 weeks apart. What happens if you don't get the second dose? Well, the good news is you get most of the benefit, or much of the benefit, from the first dose. The bad news is you don't get all of the benefit if you don't have the second dose. And if you've had the first dose, quite frankly, you're going to want to have the second dose anyway, because you're really having the vaccine to protect your loved ones and your family.
They're very good points. I think the other thing to say is that we know that the first vaccine gives you a certain amount of protection for a certain period of time. Now, we're not clear how long that period of time is, but the second dose, the booster dose, protects you more and for longer. So that's why you need the second dose as well. Okay, over to me. So this is a very common question. Is it safe for women wanting to get pregnant or who are pregnant or are breastfeeding to have the vaccine? So what we can say at the moment is we're not sure about pregnancy. As for all new medications and new vaccines, then what we do initially is that we generally don't give them to pregnant women or in fact to children either. We know that this vaccine has been given to many pregnant women overseas, so that we think it's safe, but we're not sure. So just to be extra safe in Australia, we're saying not to give it to women who are pregnant or planning to be pregnant shortly. I think later there'll be more information available and we'll know for sure whether it's safe or not. So then we'll be able to make different recommendations. It's also different in Australia. We don't have much COVID at the moment. So that if you're in a country with a lot of COVID, like Europe, England, US, then the risk to the pregnant woman and the baby is much higher. So then it's a different answer, and that's why they are vaccinating pregnant women overseas.
So the great thing about these vaccines, of course, is we've now got upwards of 300 million doses and 100 million people have completed both doses. So we've gained a lot of experience. And the experience to date overseas, as you say, where people have been vaccinated, pregnant and with various illnesses, has shown this is a remarkably safe vaccine. But Australia has the luxury of being able to be cautious, and on that basis we can delay things. The good news is breastfeeding is perfectly safe. We don't have any concerns about breastfeeding, but pregnancy, we've got plenty of time. We can afford to wait and really gather the experience of overseas, so that when we do make an ultimate decision, we're going to be very confident that this is a safe decision. I've heard extract from aborted fetuses are used in the making of the vaccines. Is this true? It is correct to say that parts of aborted feces, particularly kidney cells of fetuses from perhaps 30 to 50 years ago, have been used to create cell lines to produce vaccine. These were legally and legitimately sourced at the time, and we're using the same cells from the 1970s. The reason we're doing that, of course, is that those cells are very safe and they've stood the test of time. So I've got 50 years experience to know there's no risk. There is no fetal cells within the vaccine. There is no derived product within the vaccine. The cells simply manufacture the modified virus, which is then part of the vaccine. So yes, there are some vaccines historically which have used as the sort of cell powerhouse to produce vaccines, but they don't actually contain any fetus. And this has been a long point of discussion, because this is in the case of many vaccines, and it's long been discussed by the various churches. And to the best of my awareness, all the churches have given support for the current use of vaccines.
I think that's a very good point, Michael, that all of the various faith groups have actually given permission for this to be used. So there's been consultations specifically about the COVID vaccine and this question with all of the faith-based organisations. So that's Christian, Islamic and Jewish as well, and all of their leaders have come out in support. And the main reason for this is this vaccine saves lives, and so that they are very strong in encouraging their groups, their members, to have the vaccine. Okay. Now, another very common question: what are the differences between the two current vaccines, and why can't I choose which one I receive? So the vaccines that are currently licensed in Australia, of which there are 2 and about to be a 3rd in the not too distant future, all work against COVID. And the current ones both require 2 doses, so the initial dose, which we've discussed, and also a booster dose. But they're made a different way, and that's really the differences between them. Initially, there was some information that suggested that one was better than the other. However, as many millions of doses have been given, and once we're over the trials that were part of the initial vaccine testing and we're out in the real world, it now seems that they both work equally as well. And that's actually really important, so that we can have confidence that it doesn't matter which one we have, that we will be protected. There is a difference in the time of when the second dose has to be given, and that just relates to the evidence over what's the best timing to get the best immune response or antibody response. So for the Pfizer vaccine, that's 3 weeks, 21 days, whereas it's actually 12 weeks for AstraZeneca. So that's the difference between them. Over to you, Michael.
Yep. So we're very lucky to have lots of overseas experience with the Australian vaccines. We're very lucky to have fairly mature, by certainly COVID standards, vaccines. And we know that really by delaying them or by separating the 2 doses, you get the maximum benefit, and that's really what it's all about. to get the maximum protection from the doses. With respect to the COVID vaccination, what side effects should I expect and how long will these last? All vaccines have some side effects. The great news about COVID vaccines is their side effects are much less than most vaccines, so that's really good news. And interestingly, we're seeing more side effects in young people and much less in older people, so under 55 versus over 55. So that's great for our residents. Nevertheless, the side effects are pretty similar, although less severe than you'd get with a flu vaccine. And most commonly there's some local tenderness where people inject you, not unreasonable given that you are getting an injection into a muscle. Occasionally you get a little bit of redness and occasionally you get a bit of swelling. You do get some wider spread side effects on occasion. Rarely you can get some gastrointestinal upset with diarrhoea. But again, we see diarrhoea pretty common in people who got the pretend vaccine. So it's not hugely common. Occasionally a little bit of headache or fever, but again pretty rare. And the good news is that the average duration of these is about 2.5 days. So it's pretty much similar. The aches and pains, the general muscle aches, the local tenderness, they're all pretty similar to flu, but less severe, which is great news.
Thanks, Michael. I think the other thing that's important to say is that there's really severe reactions that you can sometimes see with the vaccine, though very rarely, are actually far less common with COVID vaccines than they are with flu vaccines and other vaccines. So I think that gives us a lot of reassurance as well. So basically, you might have a bit of a sore arm, a few aches and pains for a few days, but then you should be fine. And all the side effects are far, far less than they are with COVID.
Yeah, good point.
Okay. So another question, is it safe for people with existing medical conditions or allergies to have the vaccine? And the answer to that quickly and shortly is yes. So basically, this vaccine is predominantly given to people with existing medical conditions. When we started with giving it to older people overseas, it has been given to a lot of people with underlying health problems. It's also been given to a lot of well people, so we know that it's not causing other problems. So certainly at this stage, then we're recommending it for everyone. And in terms of the allergies, because these vaccines have new technology, in fact allergies are very rare, so that basically for the first vaccine it's very rare that there's any contraindications. A second vaccine is obviously different if someone's reacted to the first vaccine, and there are systems in place to help decide whether someone should have a second one if there's a reaction.
So for people who rarely, I agree, get severe allergies to medications, that's a time to be talking to your doctor. But indeed we're seeing very few side effects and very few severe reactions with this vaccination. So we're really pretty confident. But we do have vaccination services available at most of the public hospitals to support people if they do have some concerns about allergies. And we're going to be able to get almost everybody through vaccination. The other thing is, as you very rightly pointed out, is this vaccine is absolutely indicated in severely unwell people, particularly those who we typically see in residential care. And these are exactly the people who are at most risk of COVID, and these are the exact people we're protecting. So unwell people, older people, frail people really do best with these vaccines. And the medical community is pretty united in this. There's almost nobody who we won't vaccinate, regardless of their medical condition. So it's really great news for the vaccine, and it's really great news for Australia and public health. Next question: what is the risks of having the vaccine for frail people and those who are very old? Well, great question, because this is exactly who we're targeting, and this is exactly the group that Benetas specialises in care. So people in residential care are most commonly older and almost always have some significant degree of frailty. These people are at most risk of COVID-19, and we're all aware of the terrible consequences of the outbreaks we got here in Victoria, and certainly even worse overseas. The vaccine is absolutely indicated for these people. The risks are virtually zero and the benefits are dramatic. So this is exactly the group we're concentrating on.
I think that's a very good point, Michael, because it's, these are groups that are at highest risk. So they are really the ones we really want to make sure we have vaccinated. So I think we can reassure people that the vaccine does seem to be very, very safe, including in the very frail and the very elderly. So that's actually really good news.
Many of our residential care workers were very traumatised in the outbreaks of COVID in Victoria, and they saw older people dying, sometimes who they'd cared for a long time. And that was really, really hard for people who work in residential care. This is something we can do to actually make a difference, to protect them and to protect our staff and to protect our loved ones. So this can make a real difference.
Now, next question is, are there different side effects for different vaccines? Well, surprisingly, the answer is no. It does seem, based on the data from millions of doses, that the vaccines at the moment seem to have the same side effects. So there's certainly no reason to prefer one over the other on the basis of this. So they're all the same, and that it's fairly common to get very mild side effects and very rare to get serious side effects. So that actually really helps the decision making too.
Yes, the best vaccine clearly is the vaccine that you can get. Here's the tricky question. Can I still carry COVID and infect others if I've had the vaccine? And this is a bit of a tricky question, and it's a bit of a longer answer. Emerging data would appear to be that if you've had the first dose of the COVID vaccine, you have a dramatically reduced risk of getting severe COVID, being hospitalised or dying. There's also pretty good evidence from Europe and America where if you've had the first dose, your risk of transmitting the COVID to other people within your facility, friends and families, is also significantly reduced by at least perhaps 75%. With the second dose, although we've had hundreds of millions of doses given so far, we're still not entirely sure, but the evidence would appear to be that for the individual who's been vaccinated, the reduction is dramatic, nigh on 100%. For transmission, it's a little less clear. We're a little less certain. What we're fairly certain of is that you're going to carry less virus and be less infectious. So it's likely that there'll be a significant risk reduction, and we're already seeing this in residential care facilities in America, even after the first dose, let alone the second dose. So our belief is that in theory, you can still transmit, you can still get a very mild case of COVID, but your risks of transmission is dramatically less. I suppose that's why it's so important to make sure we try and vaccinate as many people as possible and encourage people to vaccinate so any risk is minimal.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Michael, that it is around trying to have as many people vaccinated as possible, because we think that there will still be some transmission or asymptomatic transmission, but we're not sure how much, and as time goes on, and even over the next 6 months or so, we'll have even more information. But at the moment, it's important that everybody can be vaccinated, or everybody is well enough to be vaccinated so that we can all protect each other.
We're also not entirely sure how long the vaccine is maximally effective for, so it would seem to be sensible to vaccinate as many people as possible to reduce the community community COVID rate, and therefore give the vaccine the maximum benefit. We're all very keen on reopening not only Victoria but the whole country, and internationally as well, and therefore our best chance of doing that is to ensure that the maximum number of people are vaccinated.
And we can see the benefit in some of the overseas studies already. So that Israel, which is the country that's vaccinated the most people so far in terms of percentage of their population, has a dramatic reduction in the amount of COVID. And that's made an enormous difference, including for people that are not vaccinated. So I think that that's really encouraging as well. Okay, now how do we know the vaccinations are safe? Has the approval and testing been too rushed? Now, this is a really common question. So if we look at overseas, that we have given hundreds and hundreds of millions of the vaccines so that we know that they're safe because we have all of that data. Has the approval and testing been too rushed? So overseas it was actually rushed through, but that's because they had major COVID outbreaks still going. Australia, as we know, some people have said we've been a bit too slow because we did not rush our approval when the US did. But that's because we were being cautious. And Australia can afford to be cautious because we don't have the same sort of COVID outbreak at the moment, fortunately, that they do overseas. So I think the approval has gone through our approval body, the TGA. That's the standard regulatory body for all vaccines and all medications, and it's gone through the standard process so that they haven't actually rushed it to make sure that everybody's safe and that there can be community confidence in the approval of the vaccine.
Many people in Australia have looked on with some degree of concern and even horror at the terrible death rate that they've seen overseas. And they're worried about loved ones in Europe, in Asia, in America, and they've seen the death rate of literally thousands of people dying per day. And it's been very, very distressing. So there's been huge pressure to bring vaccines as quickly as possible, and there's been a monumental amount of effort, both internationally and in Australia, to do this. Has it been rushed? Absolutely. Has it been shown to be safe? Well, so far, it's remarkably safe.
So the vaccine production has been rushed, but the approval has not in Australia.